I call this meeting to order, the Health and Human Services Committee. I apologize for my voice because I have a cold and I, to myself, sound like a frog. Since I appreciate everybody on the committee that's made the effort to get here as quickly as possible, and we now have a quorum. And since I have the two bills on for the committee's consideration today, I am going to turn over the administration of the committee to my Vice Chair, Representative Watson. Representative Watson, you've got it.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper. So we're going to do House Bill 315 first, and we will be looking at LC 334992.
Chairman, I bring today for you the bill that passed this committee last year. It made it over to the Senate and died on the last night. And it is the one that would require nurses to have, every 2 years, get at least 30 hours of continuing education. This is registered professional nurses. As you know, we just had a big discussion about people who make artificial limbs, how much continuing ed they get, and it has been felt by a lot of us, the Georgia Nursing Association, the Nursing Board, that this is something that should have happened long ago. Medicine is changing very quickly, and nursing is changing very quickly, and it's felt that nurses need to stay current. So basically it's requiring 30 hours every 2 years. That's 15 hours a year. There are multiple ways for nurses to get continuing education. The board, of course, will set up the rules for it, but there are ample programs across the country and things out on the net where they can get this. And to give, sounds so funny, to expand this a little bit, our hospitals under Title 31 are required to do extensive continuing education for their nurses already. So we put in the provision that if they work for a Title 31 hospital and somebody will certify that they have attended the continuing education provided by the hospital to meet the regulations, that counts as their continuing education. Also, if they're working on a master's degree or a PhD in nursing, that the educational courses would count if they complete their field of study in a related nursing field. Or if they're already a nurse practitioner, a nurse anesthetist, those areas of nursing require that they have continuing education already for them to be recertified as a nurse anesthetist or a geriatric nurse, and that will also be allowed to count as their continuing education if they have to do it to be recertified in their specialty of medicine, of nursing. Let's see. The other thing that the bill does is we've never had it before, was an inactive status for nurses. There are people that, nurses want to be nurses forever. They want to die being a nurse, but they're not actively practicing nursing. And now if we are going to put a 30-hour continuing education requirement on nurses, you may have a 90-year-old nurse who trained at Grady Hospital a long, long time ago, but she wants to die being able to call herself an RN, and therefore this would allow for that inactive status for them to go inactive. However, if it's a nurse that's not 90 years old and wants to come back in and practice nursing again, then the board would, they could go back to an active status, but if it's been a period of time between when they were seeing patients, then they would have to do a course to reactivate their license. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Chairman Rogers, you have a question.
Chair Lady Cooper, last year when we did the bill, you remember the amendment I did as far as the board notifying any inactive nurses?
Yes.
Is that language in here?
No.
Can we put it in there? Would you allow me to put it in there?
Commissioner Rogers, I understand, Chairman Rogers, I understand that you're concerned that because of through the mail, although they do have, the nurses do collect electronic email addresses and so forth. The problem is there's
77,000.
Well,
is what
that's
you said,
about, but that includes nurse practitioners. So, and that includes the LPNs. So I think there's somewhere around 155,000 registered professional nurses, and the board is really having trouble doing what they're doing now due to our cutbacks. In fact, to even institute the mandatory reporting law, we have to wait till funds are available, and I just really think that they may feel overwhelmed by it.
May I ask another question?
Surely.
Too? What's going to happen, though, when we get back in our districts? Those people that are inactive are going to start calling us that they hadn't been notified. That's the concern I have.
You mean that the ones that have lost their license?
Well, not lost it, but maybe gone inactive. You know, you can put it on inactive.
Right.
And these requirements on continuing ed, you know, they're going to have to do all of this. And
if they stay out, I think it's for 5 years.
I think it is 5 years.
5 years.
And the reason I say that is I've had that happen to me, and I wasn't notified. Not in nursing.
Oh, I thought maybe you had a secondary job.
No, this is
Oh, that's it.
No, you've been the candy striper, not me. But that is a concern I have. You know, the general public, whether you're a nurse or not a nurse, if they're not notified by the board, if there's a way to notify them by email or some kind of formation of notification, I think it's only right to do so. That makes sense?
I understand it. We have somebody here from the board if you would like to hear their take on that, if it's any different from mine, just from...
Well, it's still an issue when we go back home. Is
right.
It, you know, and I know it's not going to be till, what, 2016? Is that the way I've read it?
Right, yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to listen to them and see what they had to say. So.
Wait a minute,
Will you come to the mic, please?
Identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Lisa Durden, and I'm the Division Director for the Professional Licensing Boards with the Secretary of State's office. And I think the question was, did we have a way to notify people whose licenses had lapsed? Currently, we don't do that, but we do send out numerous reminders to people telling them that it's time to renew their licenses, and those reminders say if you don't renew your license by a certain date, then your license lapses.
So you have that under rule and regulation? Is that how you do that?
As a matter of practice, yes.
Okay, so going forward, you will continue to do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that answers the question.
Okay.
And you would do that for somebody, not just the ones that are active, but that have gone over to the inactive status, which would be a separate group.
Well, if they're going to inactive, then they're going to have to apply to go into inactive status,
right.
And that would have to be approved, and then they would, you know, they would know up front that if you go inactive, then these are going to be the requirements if you want to reactivate your license.
But I think what Chairman Rogers is saying, they may know that up front. I'm correct. They may know it up front when they apply to go inactive, but they may forget it 4.5 years down the road.
They will forget it.
That it's time for them to do that. And he's asking, would the board put in place the same kind of reminders of mail-in to come, that their time on inactive status was reaching the point that where if they wanted to go back to active, they would have to take the refresher courses.
What I'm asking is, example, if I put a license on inactive and I have 5 years to reactivate it, but I think I know the date in my mind, but I don't research what I have, and then I'm past the 5 years, then I don't have that opportunity. I think it's just a courtesy that the licensing board ought to do, because there's so many nurses out there, as you know, that go astray, do other things, but want to keep their license active. And if they're not notified, even though it's my fault or Dr. Watson's fault, but I think it's a courtesy that the board ought to do, because these folks are going to call all of us. They're going to call you too, but then we don't have an answer for them.
Right. Well, I think one issue that I see with that is that if people request to go inactive, they might do that at different times.
They
you know?
do.
And so I don't, that keeping track of that would be a new requirement that we would have to do, and it would require additional resources.
So we need to put it in the statute then.
If you can provide us with the resources to be able to do that.
What are the resources you need?
Well, we would need, I'm not sure how the IT part of that would function, but we need staff resources to be able to send those, to be able to pull up those lists at certain increments and send those reminders to people.
What if we just require them to do it by email? I mean, there's no expense in that, isn't that
But you're still going
correct?
to have to keep up with the times and tracking and all that.
I still think it needs to be done, but I'm just one.
Thank you. Just for clarification, the notifications that you send out now, are they by email or are they by regular mail?
The licensees who have provided us with an email address receive their notices by email. The licensees for who we do not have an email address for, we send a postcard reminder to them.
Thank you. And we have a question from Representative Rusty Kidd.
Chair or lady, and I'm very much in support of your bill, but I've got a couple of questions, if I may. One, on line 19, we're saying completion of 30 continued education hours. And I noticed that in other legislation we've had before this committee, my seatmate brought it out to me, the reason I'm asking a question. We haven't said in law exactly how many hours. We leave so much up to the board by saying up to 30 hours, up to 40 hours. We're up to 60 hours. So you don't tie the hands of the board to say you have to give X number of hours. And then as technology changes, you need to come back and say, well, we need to get 35 hours. If we put in there up to X number of hours and the board has a leeway to change it up or down without coming back here. That's just a thought.
I mean, I know that we do have some boards, Representative Kidd, where it is a specified number of hours. The pharmacy board. And this is what the nursing board asked for in conjunction with all the groups together. They wanted the 30 hours.
How many hours now do they have to have?
0.
They have to have 0 now?
Yes, sir.
And so this is 30 hours biannually?
Yes, 15 hours a year.
I don't have a problem with that. It's just a question that
Okay.
if you wanted to make it open-ended so the board could change it without having to come here if it was necessary.
No,
Mother-
I mean,
That's
not
okay.
unless the committee wants to change it. I feel safer with the board not being able to up it to 45 hours or.
No, my other question is really not about the bill per se, is that I had a constituent call me not too long ago, a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
She graduated from nursing school in Georgia. She practiced in Georgia for a while, but then she moved to Florida. And she practiced in Florida for 10, 12 years. Her name is Richie. She moved back into Milledgeville, and she couldn't get the board to respond to her to reactivate or give her reciprocity or whatever else she needed to do. And as a matter of fact, they called me, and I called the board. The board called her back and fussed at her for contacting me. And I said, I'll talk to somebody else about it a little bit later because they shouldn't be fussing at you. And is there anything in this bill or in the act that requires the board to act on reciprocity or whatever?
No, it has nothing to do with you being able to get licensed from another state. Nothing.
Yeah, maybe we could discuss that offline afterwards. Thank you, Representative Kidd.
Make a motion to you at the proper time.
Pardon?
Yes, sir, we will do. We have a few more questions from our esteemed pharmacist colleague, Representative Bruce Broderick.
Madam Chair, real quickly, one thing, and I assume the intention is to leave the board some latitude as to how they could do it. On one of the qualifications on number 4, verification of competency by a healthcare facility, you mentioned that hospitals will require their employees to have the continuing education, or by a physician's office as part of the health system. 500 hours practice is evidenced by employer certification of a form approved by the board. That would simply be signing off on a form that it has been completed, or would you leave it to the board to say these would be prescribed levels of continuing education that we would expect the nurses to take. I mean, signing off on a form, that's, you know, they're giving an affidavit that the continuing education has been completed, but does it need to be somewhat defined as to what parameters that continuing education is?
Now, these are physicians that is part of a healthcare system. So
Okay.
they would fall under that Title 31 and what the big hospital system and all has to do to keep its national certification and all. So they would be the ones that sort of describe the continuing education that is needed
For their particular
for their
practice-
particular. So you
practice
notice it
setting.
did say the ones that are working for the hospital. 'Cause
Okay,
they-
but it wouldn't leave the board leeway to say these are certain competencies that we expect with technology changes or practice changes. These are certain competencies that we expect nurses to be competent in as the practice changes.
I think that that's probably what, I mean, I think the board can in general say what they expect to be competent in an area, but I think it would only be redundant. We have somebody from, I hope, from the Hospital Association. I walked over with him, and I think that they already, in what you have to be required for certification and for the national certification, aren't they pretty specific about?
They are, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
The Hospital Association.
Yeah, go
That is
ahead.
exactly correct, and we do support this legislation.
Okay, so in that practice setting, there is a prescribed course level or competencies that have to be met. That's good. Okay, that answers the question.
Thank you. And we have a question from Representative Valerie Clark.
Madam Chair, this question is probably for our colleague from Secretary of State's office, and it would just be a yes or a no. If I were a nurse, could I look online to see when my license was to be renewed? Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Clark, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is with people who want to go to inactive is what, and the chairman has a valid concern. It's just that, you know, they fall on two different times, but there's only two major registration times for nurses, right? They're broken up into two groups. You either, the next January coming up, I think that's when my license need to be renewed, or depending on my name and where I fall, it could be the next year. So they divide the nurses because there's so many into two different groups. But if people go on inactive status, they could go on inactive status at any point during the 2-year period. And so that's what they're talking about. There would be all of these different people at different times, and that's what she was talking about. If they don't have the computer capability to keep up that, spit that out, and even if they do have the computer availability, if you have 25,000 nurses go on inactive status that are going on inactive, there's, you know, 500 this month, 100 next month, or different times. I think that's what they were talking about. Chairman Rogers has a valid thing. I'm not opposed. I mean, you want to put it in, and when we have the money to pay for it, I'm not opposed for it. It's just right now, and I would go to Representative Kidd. Representative Kidd, they have always responded to the board. To me, I will tell you that when you call down, that you don't deal with actual board members. They had a group of boards that they cover, and I have had problems in the past and have talked to the board about it with the people who answer the telephone. And sometimes I wasn't so sure that, first of all, I couldn't get through to the board people, even telling them who I was, or that, you know, that they're going to try to put through somebody that's not available and the message will get through. So, and I would apologize to the nurse who tried to get her license, but I think that would be a rarity. And, I mean, I just dealt with something with a doctor that told another representative that they had their ability to practice restricted by the board. And when I dealt, and only because they'd only come down one time, and it was all this way, and that was not the story, the truth of the story. So I think maybe you might not have gotten the entire story, and there may have been a reason that they didn't get it or didn't get it as quickly, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper. We have a question from Representative Dexter Sharper.
Question for you. It's kind of like a two-parter. Okay, if the requirements are not fulfilled, okay, what is the time limit to where they're going to become inactive? Is there a grace period where they can maybe do a late filing before they have to actually make these requirements to make them inactive?
That would, no, if you don't meet your requirements, you would not, going on inactive status would be a request you would make, not because you didn't get your 30 hours in. If you don't get your 30 hours in, it would be whether you keep your license or not. And
Okay.
Okay, so being on inactive status would mean you actually ask for inactive status.
Okay.
Okay, you're 70 years old, you don't ever plan to nurse again, but you want to still be able to call yourself a registered nurse.
Okay, so so that leads to my second question here. All right, on line 47, so everybody knows what we're talking about, it says the board shall require evidence of competency to resume the practice of nursing as a registered professional nurse in order to restore the license to active status. Okay, with that said, because that means these people were active and doing everything indeed, then they requested for inactivity. Now, in order to fulfill what you're talking about, the competency and everything, are you talking about maybe let's just say a 30-hour refresher course that includes written and practical, so they can prove that they are capable of doing their jobs? Because it's kind of open right now to where you're saying the evidence of competency. Okay, so I want to get how is that going to be determined?
The board would determine it just like they determine everything by rule and reg, and
Okay.
there are, refresher courses that are needed, and the board does have some some discretion on that. If, I guess I've been a neonatal nurse for 20 years or something like this and came back and, could say to the board my experience and stuff, they might let me take a test and see if I could pass the competency test.
Okay.
If I'd been out of nursing and had just not worked for, 10 years or something like that, I would probably have to take the refresher course.
Okay, because I like the bill, but my concern is if that 70-year-old want to come back, we got to know that they are capable and practically doing it, and also written,
Right.
if there's anybody can answer that at all. If there's something already in place,
Right.
is there a refresher course already in place to help somebody to get back in the
Do
field?
you mind coming to the podium again?
Might as well stay on this. Sit here this time.
Okay. Currently, if a nurse let's say a nurse lets her license lapse, and she hasn't worked in 500 hours, for 500 hours or more, then the board does require that she complete a competency course as a part of the reinstatement of the application. I can't say exactly what the board will require in this situation, but I would think that it'll probably be some similar requirement based on the amount of time that somebody has not practiced.
Okay. Okay.
And, Representative Dexter, you're new,
Sharper.
Sorry. The Board of Nursing is made up of nurses that have a great deal of experience, and they come from all walks of nursing. There's educators, people who run hospitals. I think we have an emergency room nurse. So they're from all the walks of the different areas of nursing. And so I found the board to be pretty sharp.
Okay.
And quite capable of evaluating a person and where they are. And so far, the board's been, very fair as I know and realistic in what they require
Okay.
of nurses returning.
Because I was just comparing it to I've been a paramedic for over 24 years, and if it lapses, you got to there's an actual, course that you've got to take
Right.
in order to get your license back.
And that would
Okay.
be probably what would happen to most.
Okay.
It would be a rare occurrence, I think, that they would ever make the exception to that.
Thank
But it
you.
might be if they're going back, if you've let your license lapse. If I let my license lapse, I was a former educator, and I was going back to be the dean of a school of nursing, they might not make me take a refresher course in the hospital to do hospital nursing.
Right.
There would be
Okay.
an occasion that there would be a kind of exception for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sharper. We have a couple of people who signed up to speak. Lo and behold, Lisa Durden is up. She's waving. Okay. Debbie Hackman for the Georgia Nurses Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of the Chairwoman's proposal for continued competency. The Georgia Nurses Association is in support of this and considers it a professional responsibility. We also appreciate the inactive status. We have a great number of nurses, like Chairwoman spoke to, that consider it an honor to be a nurse for their entire life. So we appreciate this legislation.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Okay. We have one for which number?
8.
Okay. Representative Byrd.
Yes, ma'am. Just out of a curiosity, and it might be for our last speaker, approximately what would the cost for 30 hours of continuing education be?
Thank you. There are a number of access points, online education and in-person education, and it can be as little as $10 an hour.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Barr. Dr. Hawkins, Representative Hawkins, did you have a question for Ms. Durden?
And this really does relate to the bill, but it's a great opportunity to have you here because I do have the treasurer of my campaign whose wife is a nurse, well-respected and great lady. She ran into a situation where she was going online and they were contacting her online about renewal of license. Something happened, and I don't know on whose side it was, but somehow the emails quit coming. She forgot about exactly when it was time to, to renew her license, and all of a sudden her license had been rescinded, and she didn't know it, and she's like head of a clinic. For clarification, do you have any program, and I know this would just be a courtesy, if someone's about to lose their license that have been on board, do you mail them a card also, or do you rely only online?
Online for the people who have provided us with an email address.
Right.
Now we'll save this with the nursing population and with some other populations too. We've notified like the Georgia Nurses Association, the Georgia Healthcare Association, the Medical Board, and the Hospital Association when it's time for the nurses to renew, so that those people can let their employees and members of their associations.
Right, but you don't have the capacity to actually mail a card, because in this situation it was an email, adherent email that address that caused the problem.
At this time, it's a budget thing.
Yeah, it's a budget thing.
Yes,
okay. Thanks.
If I could add to that, the Georgia Nurses Association has a newsletter that's mailed to all 115,000 nurses 4 times a year. And in cooperation with the Board of Nursing, we've been working really hard to remind everybody about the changes related to the immigration law, the deadlines for renewal, and we do that both electronically and in print, and very boldly to help stem that problem.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can answer Representative Barr's question a little bit more, is that when nurses come out, especially if they're going back into work for hospitals often have a re-entry course that they run. Now, I've never heard of one doing it for anybody that wasn't going back to work that they are going to hire, but they do. Some of the hospitals across the state do that with new, and they do it with new graduates and people, coming back.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper. I think we have, I wanted to recognize Chairman Rogers.
Madam Chair Lady, this is the amendment that we agreed on last year. May I read it?
Sure.
And I'm going to ask it be added to the bill. On Section 2 of the bill, page 2, underlines 51, it would be noted as D. The board shall provide at least 180 days prior notice to registered professional nurse or advanced practice registered nurse whose license will be inactive status for a period of 60 months from the date of the license was placed in inactive status to provide notice to each such nurse that he or she may be subject to requirements to complete a reinstatement program prior to restoration of his or her license. Such notice may be provided by electronic means or by United States mail to the last known email or mailing address of such nurse. That's exactly the same language we put in last year. So.
And I don't know.
Email's fine with me. I don't have a problem with that, but I hear the resources. Of course, there's never enough money in this, but last year it's just an issue that we're going to get the calls back on. They're not. We are. So.
Well, Chairman Rogers, I understand that, and it's up to the committee to decide what they want to do with it. But it took you a long time to read the amendment, and it's sort of complicated. And I think what you're asking the board to do is spend a lot of time on a very complicated process. And I guess what I would say, and it's up to the committee to decide what you want to do, is that with limited resources, I would much rather that those resources be spent on enacting the program to have mandatory reporting for nurses that are either strung out on drugs or alcoholics or make huge major mistakes that cause to put patients in harm. I mean, as Republicans, we are the party of personal responsibility. And as a registered nurse, I do have a lot of responsibility, and I know accidents can happen, and I can be forgivable. But there is some personal responsibility to me to know and to keep up when my inactive status is going to do. But whatever is the wish of this committee. Now, I did not follow this bill. It was not my bill last year. I did not follow what happened to it on the Senate side, and obviously that was taken out. But it is up to my committee to decide. Y'all can do.
Can we first of all see if we have a second for the amendment? Okay, we have second, Representative Barr. Do we have any discussion?
Well, let me say this, Mr. Chairman, that Lead Council will clean up the amendment to make sure it's right and in the bill. And I'm reading off last year's bill amendment. So.
We have a question, Representative Pack, related to the amendment. Okay. Let's do the amendment, and then we'll come back to that, if that's okay. Representative Kidd.
Right. Could we make the amendment only require email, as you suggested you would accept, rather than U.S. Postal Service? So when they send out their postcard, they could send it back with email address?
May I speak?
Certainly.
It doesn't solve the problem, Representative Kidd. So, here again, I'm going to go against the committee. I'm just presenting my bill like anybody else. However, that's not the problem. The problem is that you can go on inactive status any time during the year. So that means, just like I used to send out birthday cards to my constituents. Remember when we changed it and you had to do it on your birthday? So that year I sent out birthday cards to everybody. So I had to keep up and pull out all the different birthdays for everybody that voted in my district and get a card out on time. Even if I had their emails, it was still a matter. Like I said, you could have 500 people that at some point in that 180 days, how do you know it's 180 days, like the amendment says, coming from the time they'd be spitting them out at all different times. I mean, with so short of resources, how does the board keep up with that? And how do they, get an email out or either get a card out? Either one.
I was just trying to make it a little less onerous.
It's not the email or the postcard. It's the fact that you would have names coming up in that, and how do you make sure you get it out in that 180 days? And
thank you, Representative Kidd. Representative Wilkinson, you had a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I want to clarify. Did I understand the board to say they don't have the funds to do this?
Can we get the person, Lisa Durden?
right here.
Could I just clarify? I mean, I know it sounds complicated, but I mean, to me, the person that gets when you get the notification that I'm going inactive, you can't at that time key in the computer that we're going to get a notification out to that person.
Our system doesn't have that capability at this time. The other problem that I see with this, if you don't mind me adding, is if it's 5 years, is the person still going to have the same email address, or they can still be at the same mailing address? I mean, it may be just
I think what
difficult to keep
Representative Rogers was getting at is, I mean, we're making a good faith effort to notify them. I mean, I can certainly see both points here. Yeah.
Representative Watson, you're new, fairly new, 2 years, and I'm telling you, we have antiquated computer systems. I mean, I think you just saw that we may lose $20 million because the WIC program, the system was so animated and antiquated that they couldn't keep contact of who all was doing this and charging different medicines. It's one of the problems that we have, and with the cutbacks, they really haven't had money to update systems.
All right. Representative Wilkinson, you have a question?
I was just, I mean, in good faith, if we change Chairman Rogers' amendment to say when funded. Okay. Well, the people to do it.
Cost to put it in.
Yeah.
But you have to have. But
Okay. Well, why don't we, if there is any further discussion?
I think Representative Rogers, they were trying to tell you they don't have the computer capability to do it.
Representative Sharper?
And with that, that's money. So I would say we need to do it without that amendment for the sake of just too much paperwork, because the biggest thing is the inactivity of these people. So,
Representative Rogers, you have we'll give the last word to Representative Rogers, and then why don't we just have a vote then?
Since we don't have an answer, I will withdraw the amendment. How's that, Madam Chair Lady?
Representative Rogers, if we could find a way to do it to make it work, I would agree with you, but I would appreciate the withdrawal. You're right about the problem.
Well, the problem's going to come later. I can tell you where the problem's going to come.
I know,
Not now.
But we can't even get money to fund the mandatory reporting, and a new computer system is extremely important. But if you want to go, I just don't know what we do for staff. The staff has been cut.
I'll withdraw with the amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Rogers. So the amendment has been withdrawn, and Representative Pack, who strolled in here a little bit late, we'll give him the privilege of asking a question on the general bill. Briefly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for the person who represents the board. How much is the renewal fee? How much is the restoration fee? And what do you do with people who can't afford either one?
The board determines the fees.
How much is it?
I think it's $50 for the nurses for the renewal fee, for a reinstatement fee, for a
Restoration.
restoration fee. Sometimes that depends on. I don't know specifically for this one, but sometimes it depends on the length of time that the person has been inactive or lapsed.
Can you tell me like a baseball range?
I want to say it's $300, but I would have to. It's on the website. I think it's on the website. I'll let you know.
Representative Pike, a new graduate, is graduating and making about approximately $70,000 a year. If nurses are working or going back, I think we can afford to.
So it's $50 for a license, and maybe,
for every 2
maybe
years. It's not.
Gotcha.
It's not
okay.
exorbitant.
Representative Kidd, can I recognize you?
Motion do pass.
Okay.
House Bill 315 LC 334992.
Okay, we have a do pass from Representative Kidd. Do we have a second? Second, Representative Fullerton. And all those in favor signal aye. All those opposed signal the same. And we have passed House Bill 315. Thank you, Representative Chairman Cooper. So we're moving on to House Bill 317. And we're working off LC 334980. And this is Representative Cooper's also.
This bill has been requested by the Board of Medicine. And they are asking for two different things. One is an administrative license. The Board of Medicine has a rule in Georgia that to get a medical license, you have to have treated patients on a regular basis for the past 3 years. There are areas of medicine, and they are growing, where people have the knowledge of medicine, but they no longer work with patients. For example, it could be that the head of the Medical College of Georgia knew Dr. Aziz no longer works with patients, and he came from California. If he had not been actively involved with patients for 3 years, even though they were going to hire him as the president of Medical College of Georgia, which is truly an administrative job and does not deal with patients, he would have not been able to get a license in Georgia. So and this happens in the insurance field. People come to work with a Mag Mutual, and they want a physician they require for a physician to be the head of the company. Or it could be if somebody requires a head of I want to say a hospital, but that's not a good example. So this would be a type of license that you would get, that you are going to do administrative work where you do not deal with patients. And if you ever decided you wanted to go back and deal with medicine, you would have to apply for the other kind of license. And if you had not dealt with patients for 3 years, then you would have to take a competency course or a test or a course for that. The other provision of the bill is that we are becoming the leaders in certain areas of healthcare. And if there's a heart surgeon at Wellstar Hospital in my district who has developed a leading new procedure in heart surgery, and somebody wants to come, another MD, totally qualified, licensed in another state, no problems with their background or anything, they want to come and spend 6 weeks learning that new tech with that doctor at Wellstar, they can come. But all they can do is watch. They cannot have any hands-on experience with the patient. So this would, in essence, give a special licensure where people could come into the state for, certified education courses and have a hands-on experience to learn new techniques and new developments in medicine. We have somebody from the board. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
We have a question for Representative Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, the question that I have about the licensing of this administrative medicine license deals with educational requirements. Will the individual applying for this particular type of license be required to have the same educational requirements to have practiced nursing in the past at some point in time?
It's not nursing, it's the medical board.
Medical
It
board?
would be medicine.
Medicine?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, yes, I'd like, if the chairman would allow the representative, the head of the medical board to also address the issue.
Please, if you'd identify yourself and come to the podium, I'm sure we'd appreciate that.
Representatives, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm Dr. William Butler. I'm professor and chairman of the Department of OBGYN at Mercer School of Medicine, and I'm also the current chairman of the Composite Medical Board. We appreciate your consideration of this bill. Let me give you a little bit of background, and I will directly address your question. Georgia is one of very, very few states that has neither an administrative licensure for administrative practice of medicine or a non-disciplinary way to limit a regular medical license. Now let me tell you what I mean by that. In many states, instead of having an administrative license, they can issue a regular license to practice medicine, but put a non-disciplinary restriction on it, i.e., you don't have any arms, you can't practice surgery. Okay? In Georgia, under the Medical Practice Act, we do not have that option. The only restrictions we can place on a license to practice medicine and surgery, and that's what your license reads in this state, is to do a consent order in a disciplinary fashion. In many states, if there's an administrative license, they allow you to just practice administration without touching patients. And when in a state where we have institutions like the CDC, we have large medical universities, people who only practice administrative medicine, this would be a real boon to us. To directly address your issue, The requirements would still be an MD, the same educational requirements. It's just that they would not have a license to practice medicine.
Follow-up. Would they, so in other words, they would have already gone through the medical education program,
Yes.
done their residency, have actually had hands-on experience with patients, and then, through other circumstances, employment or whatever, apply for this particular designation so that they would not be required to have the same, am I understanding that correct?
In a roundabout way, that's possible. What we do find is that some people make choices in their careers where they become, for example, the chief medical officer of a hospital and don't touch a patient for many years. Or they become the head of the CDC, that sort of thing. But they still have the exact same MD requirements. They would have the same educational requirements. It's just that the license would not allow them to practice clinical medicine.
And I think what you were asking about, you're asking about the educational one. If you remember, I said they come in for a short period of time, 6 weeks, 3 months, to learn a new or to very special technique. They're already licensed. They've already been through the residencies, just like, but they're coming to learn something very new and different. We're hands-on, you know, if they're learning a new surgical technique, after observing for a while, and they're already a heart surgeon somewhere else, but they're learning this new technique, it's a whole lot better if they can then do the procedure in a hands-on fashion.
Well, may I follow up?
Certainly.
Before Dr. Richmond passed away, was the Surgeon General of the United States and a good friend of my dad's, and he was responsible for health policy. And I wanted to make sure that we were not creating a different designation that would allow for a health policy type degree in our medical college or licensing thing where they actually don't even touch a patient and don't have that hands-on experience, yet they're developing health policy.
No, the bill specifically states that they have to meet the same MD requirements.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Okay, we have a from Representative Chairman Rogers. We have a do pass. Representative Fullerton, we have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, the like sign. It passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper. Yes, visiting professor and administrative, yeah, absolutely.
Much, Representative Watson, for taking over. One of the things that we had in one of the bills we passed last year was that the Trauma Commission would report to us each year on what the Trauma Commission is doing, how things are going, where we stand, how they're spending money, and so forth. So we have that report today. So Dr. Ashley, who's going to, are you going to give the report? And you'll identify yourself, please, sir.
Yes, I'll give the report. I'm Dr. Dennis Ashley, as you mentioned, and I wanted to introduce Mr. Jim Pettyjohn here, the gentleman, who is our executive director.
Is he on?
We are, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Sort of?
I think I have to stand in front of it.
How about now? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay.
And there is a, things he's going to show on the screen. There's a thing for you to follow along. PowerPoint.
While they get the slides up, I'll just make a couple of introductory comments. This is historic in the event that it's our first presentation to go along with Senate Bill 489. So I would request that you give me feedback on the presentation since we're here at your service and want to make sure that we give you the data and information you need. So if there's something in the presentation you want to know more about or you'd like it done a different way next year, I would certainly appreciate that feedback so that we can give you what you need. My goal today is to get the slides working, first of all. And then the second goal would be to let you have the representative there was talking about people asking questions. Hopefully I will give you some information so that if you're stopped at Kroger, you can know exactly what's going on with the commission and be able to answer those questions. And if anything gets down into the weeds, then you can just give them my email or phone number and send them our direction. I'll just go ahead and get started in the interest of time here. If you want to go ahead and turn to slide 2, the slides are numbered there so we can follow along. I'll start with the House Appropriations Committee asked 4 questions during the DOA audit, and we'll go through those today, and then I'll try to tie that into where we are in the state, and then give you a chance to ask questions. You see the 4 questions that are listed there. I won't read each one, but we'll go through those one at a time. If you turn to slide 3, you see finding number 1. While data to measure improvement in service delivery and response times is limited, an increase in the number of trauma centers and in the percent of trauma patients going to trauma center indicates improvement. And I agree with that. I think that's a pretty straightforward evaluation. We have been able to increase access. We have been able to increase the number of trauma centers, not to the point that we would like to, and I'll get into that in a few minutes into some other slides as to why. But if you look at the recommendations down there, GTC, or the Commission, and the Office of Emergency Medicine Services and Trauma. Good, thank you. Should collaborate to develop a performance improvement program that utilizes data to evaluate service delivery in the state's trauma system. The performance measures should consider statewide and regional, that's a key word there, performance. And in the next bullet, the Commission should utilize currently available data sets, such as the GEMSIS data, which is a EMS data set that gives you response times. That's been a work in development, if you will, to where the EMS community has gone from paper to electronic submission of that data. So that's about to be ready to be used. And we worked all this out at a commission retreat in January, where we had OEMS&T, Dr. O'Neill, myself, as well as all the commission members, and were able to really talk about the GEMSIS data and how we can incorporate that into the trauma registry data, and how that the commission and OEMS&T can work together to get that done. We've come a long way since January in being able to do that. Now let me just share a couple of the ideas with you that we have. Turning to slide 4, it really boils down to a regional trauma plan and the components of that. Now a lot of this was going on before the DOA report, and you can read more about it in the report. It's mentioned, but I'll go into a little bit more detail here today. We had already started when we had the task of making sure that everybody had the same trauma care and developing a statewide trauma system. We were a bit overwhelmed at trying to do that for a state the size of Georgia with limited funding. So the idea was, can we break that down? Can we make it into smaller segments? And if you look at the EMS regions, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment in a map, there's 10 EMS regions. They already have some infrastructure in place, particularly in the EMS councils, and we wanted to build on that. So with that being said, we've gone to all the hospitals in those regions, and let's just take one region at a time. My region, Region 5, which is the Macon area. And we, through a lot of volunteerism, through a lot of work, through some grant funding from the Commission, we managed to get all the hospitals together, the trauma centers as well as non-trauma centers, all the EMS services together, and some physicians together from those representative hospitals. We said, what would we do if we had a patient that was hurt on Highway X at 2 o'clock in the morning? And how would we, number one, identify that that patient's critically injured, not just a scratch on the finger that could go to any urgent care, but how could we identify that that patient's critically injured? And then number two, how would we as a region, not the Atlanta region, not northern Georgia, not southern, but how would we as our region, with our resources, get that patient to the appropriate trauma center in the appropriate amount of time? And we sat around, we talked about those issues, and we wrote our regional plan. We were one of the first regions to do that, Region 5 and Region 6. Region 6 is the Augusta region. We were the test regions. So we have CDC criteria and the American College of Surgeons criteria that EMS services are using. They know how to identify that patient that's critically injured. Now we're starting to use that criteria and tighten up our regions where we can actually know where we need to go and all work together. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about regionalization. You see there, it should be data-driven and performance improvement driven. That was one of the recommendations. Before you do performance improvement, you have to have people agreeing to do something together. And so over the last year or so, I thought it would take about 3 years to do this, but over the last year, several of the regions have started to develop their plan and have heard Jim and I come around and talk about how to do regionalization and have really started buying into this. The other component of that at the bottom of the slide is the Trauma Communication Center, where we really have the trauma centers now in the state pulled together electronically, in the sense that we know from the Trauma Communication Center who's on diversion, who's not, who's weak, who's not. And what I mean by weak is, do they have one service line that's down or two service lines that's down? So on our display screen for all the trauma centers, we know 3 times a day. It's updated 3 times a day. If the hospital does not update their screen, they get a ping from the communication center that tells them they need to update. And so when the hospital calls the communication center and says, I need a trauma center, they know exactly who's on and who's not. They can provide that information.
Dr. Ashley, I think you might, since everybody on the committee is not in the medical field, by the lines you mean, it would be if a hospital is a level 2 hospital, and but their orthopedic surgeons that are covering are busy, that line would be down. It would be the orthopedic surgeons, and that hospital would not be able to take any more cases.
Correct.
Or it could be the heart surgeon was operating, and that or the neurosurgeon was operating, so people with a trauma case would know to go to some other hospital.
Correct.
It would show that that hospital could not take another head patient or another orthopedic patient, so that they wouldn't go to the hospital and find that out and then have to spend the time being rerouted somewhere else. Is that correct?
That's correct. Then if you move on to slide 5, that really just talks more about the Trauma Communication Center. I won't read every line there, but you get the idea of what we were talking about. We have the resources to let, whether it's EMS services or whether it's hospitals, know what's going on in real time at our trauma centers. Because the idea is really to get the patient that's critically ill to the right place at the right time. Now, if you turn to slide 6, you can see the regions that I've been talking about. I think the visual is a little bit easier to see. You see those are EMS zones or EMS regions, and Region 5 is my region that we're working in, Region 6. Thank you. And then if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see approved RTACs and plans. These are RTACs or regions that have actually written their plan, Region 5, Region 6, and Region 1. And then the RTACs that are in development, maybe they've already had a council meeting and they voted to form a regional trauma advisory committee, or maybe they've already started writing their plan. They're somewhere in that sequence. You see regions 9, 3, 4, 2, and 10. So we're making progress with regionalization, and once we do that, we can find out what the needs are in that region. And the reason to go to this type methodology is because what works in Region 3 here in Atlanta will not work in my region. What works in North Georgia will not work in South Georgia. So for the commission just to come in and say this one plan will work for everyone is really just not the way to go. Talking about performance, if you turn to slide 7, we wanted to benchmark, and one of the things in the report from the DOAA is that we should benchmark, we should use performance measures. You see, this slide is really just for, I won't read the whole slide, but what I want you to pay attention to is down at the bottom, the TQIP logo. It says, thank you, it says the Trauma Quality Improvement Program. This is a national program from the American College of Surgeons that 170 trauma centers participate in, and they take their data and they use it, and they can compare themselves to one another and set benchmarks, and they can see who's doing a great job and then take that toolkit and improve themselves. We are the second state in the country to have this in all our trauma centers, level 1s and level 2s statewide. The commission has funded this for the trauma centers through their readiness cost funding, and it's tied into their contracts, and so now we are statewide. I just presented this data in Philadelphia yesterday at their national TQIP conference, and so Georgia was featured along with Michigan, who is the other state that has this, as the two states that have done TQIP throughout the state. So Georgia has gained national recognition by going this route. We're just getting started with that, but you can see we're getting the infrastructure in place. This is so new that the American College of Surgeons didn't have state criteria. They've actually participated with us, and we are writing the state reports for that now. That's how new this is.
So what does it mean by identifying structures and processes of care? Give me an example, if you will.
Basically, to give you an idea of something that I learned, this one particular trauma center yesterday, they noticed that through their performance improvement that they had a lot of falls in their particular trauma center. They were having an increased number of complications because these were elderly falls on multiple medications. And so then they got experts in geriatrics to be a part of the trauma team. So they incorporated, now they call it G60, stands for geriatric over 60. And now that's the age that they picked. I'm not saying 60 is old, but anybody over 60 got a notification, and they had a geriatric expert as well as a trauma expert. And by pulling that, and this all started from looking at their data. So when they pulled that team together, now they have better outcomes, decreased length of stay. So they've solved a problem by looking at that.
I mean, they were actually having elderly people were falling in the trauma?
No, they were falling at home or off the ladder or in the bathtub. They were trauma patients coming in, but they noticed through their data analysis that it wasn't just the fall that was really the problem. It was all the comorbidities with the diabetes and the hypertension and the atrial fibrillation and the being on blood thinners and all those other diseases that they needed another expert to participate. So by looking at their data, they were able to improve their outcomes.
And okay, so they take the data and then go out away from the trauma center in dealing with the physicians and the people that are working in these different areas with elderly people?
Well, no, this particular was an internal process. So the trauma center changed their team format to put a geriatrician on the team to help manage those complex patients in the trauma center.
When they come in?
Yes, ma'am. The other, if you turn to page 8, the second finding was I can remember to change the slide. The Commission's actions to improve trauma care are closely aligned with the criteria set by the American College of Surgeons and other states. However, further improvements are needed. And you see the recommendations: the General Assembly should consider revisiting state law or revising state law to clearly define a lead agency in trauma care. Dr. O'Neill and I have talked about this, and again at our retreat, and there have been some issues where OEMS&T and the Commission trying to define our roles, who is doing what, and through our commission we've come up with a plan to define our roles. Basically, the OEMS&T are regulatory. They will designate trauma centers. They will evaluate trauma centers, and the commission will be, developing the policy for the trauma system. And so through that, we hope to have a really statewide plan in place, or at least written. Dr. O'Neill thinks that we can do this by June. I think that's aggressive, but we're very supportive, and I think we can probably do that as well, certainly by next year. What that will do is tie together a lot of things that we've done here that I'm talking about today, but put it in written format. It will also define our roles better. So I think that's the best way to go. I don't think we need new legislation, nor does Dr. O'Neill. I think through working together and writing these roles out, we can solve that problem. Also, we have a MOA, if you will, Memorandum of Agreement, to where we are defining roles through that. So I think we're a long way toward that process after our 2-day retreat in Rome, Georgia in January. If you turn the page to the next page 9, which is finding number 3, while the number of designated trauma centers has increased since 2007, there are still areas of the state in which injured patients must be transported long distances to receive definitive care at a level 1 or level 2 trauma center. And you see the recommendations. The Commission and OEMS&T should determine the number and level of designated trauma centers needed in Georgia based on geographic location, population density, and hospital capabilities. We're working out metrics to do that, and let me just show you how those metrics might look, and based on some information we gathered from the DOAA report. Turn to page 10. what we want to do is, number one, increase the number of patients that are going to designated trauma centers that have those really critical injuries that I talked about earlier. And with limited funding, we want to make sure that we get those centers in the right place. In other words, you don't want a bunch of centers in one place. You want them spread throughout the state. So how do you do that? Well, when we were formed as the commission, remember several trauma centers were talking about dropping out of the system. Since we formed, no trauma center has dropped out of the system, so I'm going to give you some financial data here in a minute, basically paying 10 cents on the dollar of their readiness costs. We've been able to keep those trauma centers in the game, and we've been able to add 2 level 2 trauma centers, which is huge, one in Athens, the other Ken Stone, to come into our system. So it's been a difficult sell, if you will, when our budget's been up and down, and when we're paying 10 cents on the dollar in good faith to recruit those folks to come into the system, but we've been able to do that. Things that we need to do in the future is to look at our regions. And so just look, this is a busy map. If you look at not the bar graph, but the line graph to the left, look at the diamond part. You see it's easy to spot because the diamonds, it has a jump from about 32% all the way up to almost to 70%. If you look at that region, that shows the impact of one hospital becoming a trauma center in that particular region. And you can see on the y-axis on the left, the percent of patients going to a trauma center went from about 32% all the way up almost to 70%. So that was a good find. That was a good, using that metric, that would go by, survive anybody's metric, jumping that many percentage points and getting patients to that trauma center. So this is one of the metrics that we want to use when we look in the future with the trauma center coming online. Our question will be, how will that impact care? How will that impact the number of patients going to a trauma center? If it's 1%, but another hospital comes online in a region and they have a 30% impact, we need to take that into consideration as a commission. We need to look at that. If you look at the bar graph to the right, again, this is a different headings here. This is the number of patients that are within 25 miles of a trauma center in yellow. So you can see, let's take Region 5, which is my region, 54%. But look at Region 4. Only 17% of those patients in yellow there, 17% in Region 4, are within 25 miles of a trauma center. So when we look at this geographically, we would say Region 4 would be someone we would want to target as getting a trauma center there. Now, there's no trauma centers in Region 4, so we just met with them on how to deal with this issue, and they're going to have to come up with, transport. Their money, their funding will probably be tied up into transport. But you can see we're starting to get our handle around this process of what they allude to in the report of metrics. And using these 2 metrics, this could help us to decide where we need or who could come on and be a trauma center. Also, working with GHA and using their hospital discharge database, we can get an idea of where the patients are now and what hospitals are doing a lot of trauma, and with some support and financial help and support, who would be a good candidate to come online. The problem with the GHA data set is that it gives us the discharge data and injuries, but it doesn't really stratify that injury into the complexity or detail that we need. So we're working with Bishop and Associates, who's our national consultants, and we've figured out a way to assign injury severity scores to that discharge data set, to where now we can know exactly how sick those patients are in those hospitals, and we can do a cost assessment and analysis based on the data that I've just showed you, and decide really who would give us the most bang for the buck, if I could say that, to give us the big impact with our state dollars. If you turn the page to slide 11, this is what I was talking about with the recent trauma center readiness costs. You see there, I won't read all that to you, but you can see the fiscal year on the left, the budget, our state budget, and you can see how that's fluctuated up and down over the last few years. So when you're trying to work with centers and get them to come in and out, it is difficult. But if you look over here to the third column from the right, you see the level 1 and level 2 combined estimated average readiness cost. What does that mean? That means that the amount hospitals have to spend before they see the first patient to be a trauma center. This is having neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons, various surgeons on call 24/7. This takes into the account that that's not charges, that's readiness costs. And we've become very analytical with that. We're getting ready to publish that paper now. We're I think, the second state to really analyze it in this way. Florida has done it. So we're pretty tight on the readiness costs as far as having definitions. But you can see there, if you can just go to the last line, you see, I'll just read the 2014 projections. 15.9 million, I'm at the bottom of the page there, is the budget. The level 1 and level 2 combined estimated average readiness cost, 53.4 million. The combined readiness funding is about 4.7, which comes out to be about 8.8% or 8 cents on the dollar. So the fact that we've been able to add 2 level 2 trauma centers in this type of economic crisis, I think shows the hard work of OEMS&T, the Trauma Commission, as well as just a lot of folks that don't have a title that's just been out beating the drum trying to get people to join the trauma system.
What you're saying is that we're asking hospitals to come into the trauma center, into trauma at a trauma level of 1 or 2, and hire neurosurgeons and have them on call all the time, and the other specialty of surgeons and so forth, and pay their salaries, and we're reimbursing them, you know, at 9%, and the hospital is picking up 91% of the cost.
Correct. And it's a partnership, and it's a philosophical question, you know, how much should the state pay? How much should the hospital pay? And it's a partnership, but I think 90-10, by anybody's definition, is not the best partnership, and we would like to see that increase if at all possible. And obviously, we understand the situation that we're in, but again, we have to be honest with. There's only good faith can go so far, but we've been sort of beating the drum every year.
But certainly not a big incentive for a hospital in an outlying region that's not as big as maybe the mega systems in Atlanta. It's not much of an incentive to come on.
Correct.
As one of the trauma 1 or 2 level centers.
Correct. If you go to slide, let's see. If you go to slide 12, now I was talking about readiness costs. Let's shift gears. Now we'll talk about uncompensated care. There are 2 different silos in the commission budget. Now this is actually seeing patients. This is the cost of seeing a patient. And if you look down there again, let's look at fiscal year 2013. There was number of claims that the trauma centers could send in, a little over 2,000. Total costs were 29. We have pretty complicated formulas to figure all this out. I won't bore you with that, but I'm happy to sit down and share them with you. 29 million. The amount of reimbursement on that was 5 million. So again, 17 cents. You see there to the far right-hand column, 17 cents on the dollar. Now that's not all uncompensated care claims. That's very tightly controlled as well. In Senate Bill 60, which I have a slide in here. I'll come back to that in a minute. But in Senate Bill 60, it specifically tells us, you know, absolutely no insurance, no car insurance, no Medicare, no Medicaid, and you don't qualify for Medicaid, and the hospitals have to show that they tried to qualify for Medicaid. We've audited hospitals. You know, we're trying to be good stewards of the money that you give us, and we've had the hospitals audited. So their records are reviewed. We make sure that they're not gaming the system and that everybody's on a fair playing field. But even with doing that, again, you see that with it tightly controlled, we're still only paying 17 cents on the dollar for the uncompensated care.
Well, Dr. Ashley, I mean, I know we're paying readiness cost, but the readiness in getting a hospital to open up a trauma center, we're only giving them half of what we give them for uncompensated care. Isn't readiness just as important as the uncompensated? Because isn't readiness basically a one-time thing? Once they're up and running, they're there serving people in underserved areas for serious injuries, and then they have an opportunity to get a higher percentage of uncompensated care. It seems like we ought to be putting a little bit,
So you got a great question, but and I didn't want to bore you with the equations, but just how that works out. Each level 1, and we've done cost surveys, I'd be happy to share with you. I can tell you what the cost for level 1 is. So each level 1 has the same readiness cost because, in our opinion, because they have to meet the same American College of Surgeons criteria. Level 2 should have about the same cost because they are in a different category. So we fund a certain percentage. Every level 1 gets the same, every level 2 gets the same because that's their level in readiness. It's not the full, but it's part. Where there's a dichotomy, if you will, is uncompensated care, because one center may see a lot of uncompensated care, one center may see less uncompensated care. And then, so one center they all get the same for readiness, level 1s, level 2s, as far as their particular level, but you'll see some differences in the funding for the uncompensated part. And we also broke it down even further. If I see 100 trauma patients, they may not be as sick as your trauma patients. So we actually break it down into 4 different levels of injury severity. So you get more money for uncompensated care if you see more uncompensated care patients, if they're sicker. And so we've got pretty technical with the equation. Finding number 4, I'm about done here. I appreciate your attentiveness. Finding number 4, the Commission has mitigated approximately 24% of uncompensated care. I gave you a little bit different number, but I was just looking at 1 year. This is an average over a few years. And incurred by the trauma centers, and 65% incurred by participating EMS providers. That looks pretty dramatic when you see 65% for EMS. What you have to realize, that's only of the providers that transported trauma patients to a trauma center and of the claims that were submitted. So with all those qualifiers on there, they got 65 cents to the dollar on that particular claim. The next slide, slide 14, you see that just goes into great detail what I just said about what the claims are with the medical insurance and what Senate Bill 60 shows. I won't read that to you, but you can read and ask me questions. Going on to the last finding, number 5, this was about the ambulance replacement grants. And it says the extent to which the Commission's ambulance replacement grant program benefits trauma patients is unclear. We would agree with that in the sense that it's hard to get specific outcome data that if an ambulance went to a county that's very rural, you know, how many lives did that save? It's a hard number to get. So we agree with the recommendation that the Commission should evaluate the ambulance replacement grant program impact on trauma patients using defined metrics to determine whether it is best use of EMS distribution funds. Let me just give you the history on that as I close here. You see the bottom graph there was taken out of the DOA report, and the way the grants came about, when we met with EMS leaders throughout the state and we asked them, what are your needs? A few years ago when we came up with this grant process, the folks from rural Georgia told us, you know, uncompensated care really doesn't help us that much because I may only transport 3 or 4 patients that are this kind of sick trauma a month, but I've got to be ready to go 24/7. If somebody comes through my county and has a bad wreck, you know, they still expect me to be there. So we need readiness money. And when you talk to the folks in more metropolitan areas, the feedback we got is that, you know, we see a lot of uncompensated care patients. We might do 10 or 15 or 20 runs of trauma a day. So the uncompensated care would be helpful to them. So what we came up with was a system that the funding for uncompensated care would probably benefit the metropolitan areas or the more busy centers. The funding for rural Georgia would be more in readiness. So then once you looked at that, we said, what's your needs, rural Georgia, for readiness? And they said, well, we have ambulances that have 200,000 miles on them, or some of them with 300,000 miles. We need help. And so we set a criteria there. You see the 5 criteria or so that are listed. Vehicle age. If your ambulance was really old, you got more points. If your ambulance had a lot of mileage, you got more points. If were a long way from a trauma center, you got more points. If you had few hospital beds in that region, you only had one hospital with 10 beds or 20 beds, or you got more points. And if there was not many patients or not many people in your community, you got more points. So you get the idea. This was basically a numeric or an objective score, and how much ever money we decided to put through our formulas into EMS readiness for that particular year, we would help those communities fund an ambulance. So when we did the analysis, you see here we do have some data that shows that in 2009, you see the score of all those grants, the average. The average age was 10 years, 197,000 vehicle miles. The average distance from a trauma center was 65 miles, population density of 48, and the number of acute care beds only 31. When Mr. Pettyjohn went back and did analysis in 2012 to see if we were still funding a need, you see those numbers are almost the same. So we were still helping the rural communities replace old ambulances. The grants have decreased over the last 5 years. We're now down to only funding, 10 ambulances, I believe, this process. But we fully agree that that's something that needs to be looked at. Is that a good way to spend our money? We need to look further and see. So that's basically how we came about with the ambulance grants. The next slide just shows the super speeder bill, which is HB 160. And if you'll look at the fiscal year 11, revenues collected were right at $14 million. The commission budget was 10. In 2012, our revenues collected $18 million. Our commission budget was 15. And then if you look at for 2013, for the 6 months so far, we're at $8.7 million, which will, if we stay at pace, should put us at about 17.8 or 18 million, and our projected budget's at 15.4. So that is our only funding source. We have been tied to super speeder. Being a physical conservative, I think that's the way it should be. You shouldn't spend more than you have, unless in crisis. But then again, I think with super speeder picking up speed, I have to say that with tongue in cheek, I think we should be tied to it when the revenues are up as well. So with that being said, I'll end with some patience, because after a hard day of doing things and talking about funding, it really boils back down to this, and this is really what keeps me going. So thank you for your time. You've been very attentive. That was a hard report to get through. I had a lot of data. But again, this is our first report under this new bill. Appreciate your feedback and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Watson.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper. Dr. Ashley, just for my education, the report back here is the first one I've seen. And is this an annual report or every 2 years or?
I believe, if I remember the bill correctly, it's once a year. This time of year, I'm supposed to report.
Okay.
My
And
findings.
the next division of audits was there a reason for that? Is that just routine government work, so to speak, or?
My understanding is that the House had 4 questions, and periodically when they have questions, they send to the DOAA, and they answer those questions and then provide a report.
Okay.
So they met with us and were very good. I'd like to just mention Emily Dennis, who did an outstanding job in that organization, answered our questions, provided feedback. So kudos to her.
So in next year, looking at slide 6, the trauma centers in Georgia, I mean, this is obviously very simplified, but we have a Emmanuel Center there in Swainsboro, a really small hospital on level 4 trauma, and I'm looking at Region 8, which has Thomas County as the only one, but yet in the center right there is Albany, Daugherty County. That's a pretty big hospital, isn't it?
It is, and we've had much communication over the last couple of years with them. They actually, I'm told by OEMS&T that they do have a registrar and they are collecting data, which is mandatory before you before you can even apply to be a trauma center. You have to collect data for, I forget the number of months, I think it's 6 months. and they are doing that. So the next question that we're all holding our breath about is, will they go the rest of the way and fill out the application and come into the system?
So in other words, hospitals that are anteing up, like yours, Medical Center and Memorial in Savannah, where I am, and here in Atlanta, they're supplementing the readiness, 90% or so, or whatever, and uncompensated care significantly. But their Albany hospitals are considering this?
Considering, I guess, would be the right word.
That would be Phoebe Putney.
We have not had formal, again, that would go straight to OEMS&T as a formal request. I have not been notified that we have that yet. Now, there's some verbal, as again, we talk, and there's been some statements that they would come into the system, but I don't have that in writing. I can't confirm that yet.
Are you talking about Phoebe Putney?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So they're in the news twice today, I guess.
Well, and I will tell the committee for just information, Phoebe the region, that region costs the state more than any other region for our employees. Phoebe Putney sort of has a nice little monopoly on there. Work hard on getting them in. Maybe that will get back some of our money that we have to pay out that's higher than the rest of the state. They're a little difficult to work with sometimes, just to say the least. So, hope you're successful.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Sharper.
Okay, thank you.
Sharper.
I was just looking on page 6 where we're seeing the in regions 7 and 8 that I don't see where they have a regional trauma advisory committee. Is there any reason why they don't, or just the lack of their part to put one together, or what?
We are working with them now, and again, that's nothing negative necessarily on their part. It's just that we're trying to travel around to the different regions, and it's just a matter of time. It takes a while to get around to everybody. So we're trying to work with them now. They're just not that far along yet.
Okay, and then on page 10, number 8, well, region 8 has 15% on that number. Because I live in that region.
I'm sorry, which region was that?
8. On
Region
page
8.
10, it has 15%. Is that,
Correct. So what that means is that only 15% of your citizens or constituents or patients are within 25 miles of a trauma center. So that would be an excellent region to work with, and certainly any support that you could lend us, we would greatly appreciate in working with that region.
Okay, and I would be happy to be a part of that, because one thing I'm seeing that because of it being close to Florida, I think that we're losing money in our particular city where they'll go down to maybe Gainesville and spend money there. But I think if we were in a position to, be a better trauma area, center, then even the places in Florida that maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes from us, they'll come up to us, to Georgia, and bring us money.
It's a good point.
So we're losing money, not just the fact that we, not close enough, but we're losing money both ways.
Well, I think worse than that, you're losing time.
Yeah,
of getting patients to the trauma center in that golden hour.
Exactly.
If they're having to drive to Florida,
Yes, ma'am.
if they're,
Yeah.
is 25 miles considered? How did you get why the 25 miles? Is that what you consider to be when the accident occurs, the people get to them, the first responders, and then can get them back to the hospital within the golden hour?
Well, I think the 25 miles was just, we had to pick a number, and I think this came from DOT and from Dr. O'Neill's shop, and they just picked some concentric circles of 25, 50, 70, just some round numbers to give us an idea of how to look at it.
Okay.
And it's important to notice that in Atlanta, 25 miles is 25 miles, but South Georgia, 25 miles, they're different birds. 2 miles in Atlanta with traffic may take longer than 25 miles. So we haven't talked about time as much today, but time and distance can be similar problems.
And I'll add to that, and being that near Valdosta, I think 30 miles radius, usually the smaller rural hospitals can at least get to our hospital, or even Archbold, who's on here as a level 2 maybe, trauma center. But I think that's a pretty good, time distance. But anything out of that will be real bad, detrimental.
Is the goal of the commission still, if I remember correctly, to have a system across our state where everybody can get to a trauma center without that is in an accident or has an accident bad enough to be considered a high-level trauma, to get them to a trauma center level 2 or 1 within an hour?
That should be our one of our metrics that I talked about. And I think we're about to get to the process of having the infrastructure to figure some of that out where we are with the GEMSIS data. Dr. O'Neill's been working on that pretty hard, and Keith Wages and the EMS director at the state. Because what that can do is give us the starting piece of where the patient came from, and I'll just use the highway or the ditch. And then with our registry data at the state, then we can if we can tie that together, then we can get an idea how long it took you to get to definitive care. And so once we get that denominator, then if we make a 10% improvement, 20%, I can come back to you folks and say, this is what we've done. It's just been hard to get there to this point, but the pieces are starting to line up in the software and the infrastructure that we need to get to that point. But you're absolutely right. If we could just say like in Maryland, they brag that any citizen hurt there, they can have them at the trauma center in 20 minutes. That's pretty incredible, but they're a small state, and they have helicopters everywhere. We're not going to hit 20 minutes, but certainly if we could be less than an hour, we've got a real shot at changing survival.
The outcomes. Representative Barr.
Chairman, thank you for coming. This is just my ignorance, but where do the revenues go that exceed your budget? On slide 16, and let's say in 2011 there was roughly 14 million. Your budget was 10. Where do the monies go? Do they remain in the general budget?
I would assume so, since it's my understanding that the super speeder comes into the general. I'm way out of my league here, but this is what you all do. But it's my assumption that the money comes into the general fund, and then through budgeting, then it comes back to us, or comes up. We don't receive the super speeder funding, so I assume it's in the general budget.
Representative Barr, it's sort of like that $4 million that the nurses pay in to the board, and they only get $2 million back. If we had that $4 million, we could do what Chairman Rogers would like to do and have the mandatory reporting also, but it goes into the central budget.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your work you're doing here. This, when I first came on about 7 years ago, trauma, the discussion on starting up the trauma commissions and all that was, I think, sort of at the the conversation was beginning. And we talked about, I remember hearing the conversation that related to the regions that are underserved, which would be like region 4 and 8. And if I want to make sure I'm understanding, did I hear Dr. Watson say, you have hospitals there that have the capacity or the capability of having level 1s or level 2 trauma centers, but they have not bought into the system yet? Am I hearing that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So what that basically, if I can just, I know it's a hard concept to get your hand around or your head around, but if I could put it in this way, I get patients at my trauma center in Macon from an hour and a half, 2 hours away. Now, there are certain hospitals south that if the patient's hurt in their county, they have neurosurgeons, they have orthopedic surgeons, they have a lot of firepower, if you will, that can take care of that patient. And they do. But as they move farther out from their county, then there's this general culture, if you will, that, well, those patients need to go to a trauma center, and so that's why I get patients from so far away, when it would be closer to go, maybe to the hospital that has those surgeons on staff. Now, so that's sort of how reality happens. So you get patients from far away when they could go somewhere else. Now, with that being said, so what we try to do is talk to those hospitals and say, you've already got a lot of infrastructure in place. You've got some of the key components. But why don't you organize a trauma service? Why don't you have a trauma director? Why don't you do trauma performance improvement? Why don't you do all these 100 things that the American College of Surgeons say you need to do to be a quality trauma center? Why don't you just add that on, and we'll give you some funding and try to help you do that? And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the sort of problem is. And so I don't know if that was sort of a long-winded answer to your question, but maybe that.
So is there some pushback because of the funding, more so?
I've heard two things, and I've been to a lot of these hospitals talking and taking a lot of arrows from their medical staff and stuff, you know. But the two things that I've heard is, number one, we need funding to do those things. And I said, well, we're working on it. Trust us. You know, we're working hard. We'll get as much as we can to help you. And then number two is that they're afraid if they turn their light on, if they say, quote, I'm a trauma center, that somehow all the trauma patients in Georgia are going to come to them. And that's a myth that we have to, through education, dispel, that just because you turn your light on, you're not going to automatically be overwhelmed with trauma patients. And so their comeback is, we'll build a system where we can go on diversion, we can say that we can't take any more, that we won't get every patient. You know, somebody over here will take some too, and that's one of the ways we came up with the concept with the Trauma Communication Center. There'll be somebody there tying everybody together. All the hospitals can play together, and that, you know, if you're overwhelmed, if your resources are overwhelmed, you can hit the red button. We don't make you do that. You can hit it yourself and say, tag out, I'm down for 2 hours, I'm down for 4 hours, and then you can come back online. And that's got a lot of traction with those hospitals that have been nervous about being overwhelmed, that they'll have somebody to help them. They can say stop or tag out. So those are the two big issues that I've heard as I've traveled around the state over the last few years as to why they don't want to come into the system.
Yeah. One follow-up and I'll be done. So one of the conversations and I heard you mention just a minute ago, how much are we utilizing AirMed, the air transportation, should I say?
I think it depends on where you are. We are utilizing it. The commission right now has no funding mechanism for AirMed per se. A lot of this is just happening around the state. There's several air carriers that went into South Georgia in the last few years that have really helped my center in the sense that, you know, as I said, I got patients from maybe 2 hours away. Well, if there's a helicopter in South Georgia, they can get them a lot quicker to me. Mm-hmm. The commission, we did have a few years ago, we had some grants where we helped some trauma centers provide, you know, life-saving equipment and some things that they really needed. There was a hole or a gap in coverage, and we got a grant to put a heliport on one of our buildings because the helicopters were having to land away from the hospital, be put in an ambulance, driven over, and we were really losing our benefit because it was taking so much time. Plus, it was a safety issue for the paramedics, you know, with having to unload twice. So now we have a heliport on the roof, and just through luck, the helicopter services 2 or 3 went into South Georgia, and that's been able to get us better access to our patients to get them to us quicker. So AirMed is being used throughout the state. Each region's a little bit different. I've met with some of those folks recently, and what I would like to see happen is them tie more into the plan. And as each region writes their own plan, when my region wrote their plan, we actually put in there, you know, consider calling a helicopter X, you know, when. Mm-hmm. And so that's the dialogue that needs to take place, you know, when to do it, when not to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Watson.
Representative Howard, I mean, the facts are, though, is that, in follow-up, there are several hospitals in our state, that have committed and have been committed for years. These are newer, some of these issues are newer, but they've been around for years. I mean, again, Memorial in Savannah's done it, the Medical Center in Macon's done it, they're level 1. Several here in Atlanta are level 1. Columbus has a level 2. But if you look at that area, you're exactly right. Level, in that 8 and down in the southern part of 9, there's just lacking, and getting the pushback is not, that's disappointing certainly, because the hospitals are there for patient care and they certainly get disproportionate share, and then we just voted on a bed fee for Medicaid for some of that uncompensated care, that's a major issue. Even in, the helicopters, that's a major issue. But it is terribly, disappointing from a, disproportionate share the federal government does, and the federal government pull down that we just voted on here a couple weeks ago. We certainly thank you for your testimony and bringing us up to date, Dr. Ashley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Sharper.
And the sad thing is, we need that help in 7 and 8. We need the bigger trauma centers. But I spoke with AirMed this morning, to their representatives, and they said that they're having problems being able to get in that area. Southwest Georgia has been a big problem for them. I mean, so we're in bad shape either way, with the trauma center or even the helicopters coming in. So we need. I want to be on some type of committee to help put that together, if I can be.
Well, I'll follow up with you, and then anybody that's willing, we're happy to have extra help.
Right.
Thank you for being willing to do that.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any other questions. I do appreciate you coming. I mean, are we still trying to get level 3 and 4s, but especially the 4s? Or, I mean, at one time, I think there was a feeling we should have all the hospitals in the system designated, even the 4s that would be gathering information, that's all. Are we still doing that? Or are we really concentrating more on getting 2s? I mean, the only difference between a 1 and a 2 is, don't the 1s do research?
Yes, ma'am.
More research in the 2s. So are we concentrating on the 2s?
Yes, ma'am. We're concentrating. Really, what the main thrust is with the 2s. That I think we've mined all the level 1s in Georgia. I don't think there's really anybody else that's going to qualify to be a 1. I think we're good there, but really filling that gap with 2s, we've got our eyes on a few, and there's a couple, that would make a tremendous impact if we can get them into the system. 3s and 4s are really not that big a part of the budget. What the 4s can do is that we applaud those hospitals for really what they are doing is increasing their expertise to identify that critically ill patient, identify bleeding, shock, identify airway problems, do some minor things, and then get them out the door quickly. And we funded some rural trauma development courses, again, that's put together by the American College of Surgeons, but we've been traveling around and going to some of these smaller hospitals, and we take the course to them, we work with their staff, and we teach them how to get that patient out. It's been very well received. So some of our funding is going for education in those critical access hospitals, if you will, to make sure that they're a part of the system, because when the farmer comes up in a pickup truck and ends up at their door, they've got to work quickly and get that patient to the right place. So that's where education comes in.
Are there any other questions, Dr. Ashley? That's it. All right. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to hearing from you next year.
Thank you.
Be back with you when we have other questions.
Okay.
During the
Please call me
Thank you very
anytime.
much.
Thank you.